The job of the referee in the world of combats is one of the most difficult and controversial jobs anyone could have in all of sports. The line between a fighter's victory and defeat, his entire career, and even his life or death more often than not hangs in the hands of the referees. In the past, we've seen crazy point deductions where the situation did not warrant one, blatant ignorance in the face of rule breaking by the fighters, and extremely late calls that have resulted in severe long-term injuries for fighters, which has abruptly halted and even ended some careers. So without much further ado, let us take a look at some of the biggest referee mishaps in the world of MMA. Yan vs Aldo. Kicking off our list is one of the most recent referee mistakes, as Petr Yan took on Jose Aldo Jr. for the UFC Bantamweight Championship of the world. Leon Roberts, the referee in question, was having a pretty good day overall as the fight was largely even for the first 3 rounds. But after the 3rd round, Petr Yan began to pile on the pressure on Jose Aldo, and as consequence, the referee. At the start of the 5th round, the narrative of the entire fight had changed, and the Russian landed a punch combination on Aldo that sent the Brazilian to the ground. This was followed by a consistent barrage of unreplied punches that lasted for well over 2 minutes into the 3-minute mark. Following the fight, UFC President Dana White called the decision not to end the fight sooner horrible, and suggested more stringent measures in selecting referees in the future. Khabib Nurmagomedov vs Thiago Tavares. Khabib Nurmagomedov, throughout his undefeated professional career, developed a reputation for delivering vicious ground and pound to his opponents, and this was most evident in his fight against Thiago Tavares. But the referee at the time, Dan Miragliotta, most certainly had a hand to play in this display of viciousness. The fight began as expected, with Khabib exerting a superior level of dominance that we would become accustomed to as the years went by. He was landing his big shots at will before a left hook sent Tavares straight to the ground. This sequence was followed up by Khabib landing 15 undefended and 1 replied blows straight to the head of Tavares right under the nose of Miragliotta, who seemed to have no idea of what was going on in front of him. Eventually, Tavares was out unconscious following the repeated blows, and the referee had no choice but to end the fight. In the aftermath of the fight, Dana White took to social media to bash Miragliotta and even threatened to cut him off. But the referee has continued to preside over fights up until 2022. It remains to be seen whether he makes another high-profile error. Shevchenko vs Cachoeira. A list of bad refereeing decisions would certainly not be complete without talking about Mario Yamasaki. While he was with the UFC, Yamasaki was known to have a multitude of bad calls, and this fight is on the top of the list. In many ways, this was perhaps the worst stoppage in the history of the UFC.
AV bullshit. I mean, that guy is too focused on being some kind of playboy in front of the cameras, making his little heart logos. Maybe he should go back and read the fucking rule book.
Valentina Shevchenko was on her way up towards a UFC title, and before the fight, it seemed like a formality that she would secure the victory. But what we didn't know was that it was going to be a monumental beatdown. From the very first second, the bullet was on another level to Cachoeira, and completely dominated the first round with various unanswered strikes. The second...
No secret. Yes, he is sport. Forget that.
The second round came, and the same story continued, but this time more brutally. Shevchenko kept pounding on Cachoeira while she was inside control with no way of getting up or defending herself, up until she eventually gave up her back and got choked out. To this very day, it remains to be seen why Yamasaki did not end the fight much earlier, and UFC President Dana White certainly felt the same way. In a social media post released shortly after, he labeled the decision from the referee to let the fight carry on as disgusting, and vowed to never let Yamasaki ref in the UFC octagon again. Paul Craig vs Jamal Hill. For many of the recent MMA fans among us, Jamal Hill is the undisputed light heavyweight champion of the world, following his impressive victory over Glover Teixeira. But barely 18 months ago, he was on the end of an absolute blunder from the referee. A blunder that might have as well ended his professional fighting career. At UFC 263, he was scheduled to fight Paul Craig, a fellow light heavyweight contender, and within minutes of the first round, he found himself in a highly compromising position, with Paul Craig putting him in arguably the most painful position to be in, the arm lock. The referee of the fight, Al Guinee, looked to be paying attention to the event that was unfolding right before his eyes, but inexplicably, he was completely oblivious to the reality that Hill's arm was completely dislocated. Even the commentary team, which included Joe Rogan, could notice the immense damage that had been done to the arm of Hill, and even said that the arm was flapping around.
Look at his arm just flopping around. And the referee
but the referee did not seem interested in ending the fight right until when Jamal Hill tapped. Following the fight, everyone could see how badly Jamal Hill's arm was damaged, and it begs the question of how Guinee could have missed such scenes. Jessica Andrade vs. Lauren Murphy. UFC 283 witnessed some of the most exciting matchups of the last year, but one fight that perhaps stole all the headlines for all the wrong reasons was the women's flyweight bout between Jessica Andrade and Lauren Murphy. Heading into the fight, there were expectations that the fight would be largely competitive, but what we witnessed was anything but that, as Andrade put on arguably the biggest beatdown in the entire UFC history on Lauren Murphy. Such was the magnitude of the beatdown that UFC commentators Daniel Cormier and John Anik were questioning why the fight wasn't stopped sooner by the referee in charge Osisris Maia. Eventually, the fight would go to a decision, and Andrade would be declared the winner.
I feel like if that was boxing, that would have been stopped. Probably after the first round.
But many UFC fighters, media personalities, and fans alike took to social media to express their mass displeasure at the unwillingness of the referee to save Murphy from herself. It was a fight that would have certainly taken a substantial number of years off Murphy's fighting career. Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos vs. Benoit Saint-Denis. Rounding up our list of some of the biggest referee mistakes in the UFC is another one-sided beatdown, this time involving fighters Zaleski dos Santos and Benoit Saint-Denis, with referee Vyacheslav Kiselev in charge of proceedings that night. The first round of the fight was largely even, with both fighters landing big shots on each other. But as soon as the second round came, the story of the fight changed. Dos Santos was clearly the better man, and was landing blow after blow on Saint-Denis, with the latter even turning his back on him at some point. The beating was so bad that the UFC commentators were screaming at the top of their lungs for the fight to be stopped, but it was to no avail, as the referee seemed oblivious to what was happening right before his eyes. Eventually, the fight got to the judges' scorecard, and Dos Santos was unsurprisingly declared as the winner, but the beating Saint-Denis took would have taken a few years from his lifespan, and the referee Vyacheslav Kiselev was banned from officiating that night as a reprimand for his ignorance.
To say.
Yeah. We've had lots of incidents with referees, you know.
Like, to be removed in the middle of a card.
Yeah, we've removed guys in the middle of cards too. But this was pretty bad.
Big John McCarthy reacted and tweeted, "Holy hell, I just watched the worst job of officiating at a UFC event ever. Please just don't let him do another fight ever." Daniel Cormier also weighed in and tweeted, "Honestly, the worst performance I have ever seen from a referee in my life. Honestly, a hard job, but man, unreal. Makes you respect the good ones. I hated watching that. I hope Benoit is heading to the hospital right now." The job of the referee is a rather difficult and delicate one, and it is pretty easy to forget that they are humans while pouring criticism on them. But given the enormous responsibility on their hands, making such mistakes like the one listed above, as well as others that fail to make the list, should not be taken lightly, and more stringent measures should be taken by the UFC in selecting and training their pool of referees. Maybe then we might begin to have scandal-free fights going forward. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to let us know by smashing the like button, and we'll see you in the next video.